Good day and welcome to Focus on Air Traffic Navigation Services. I'm Moik Peterson. For over 27 years, the world has celebrated International Civil Aviation Day on the 7th of December. The objective of the day is to raise awareness about the sector and to highlight the role of civil aviation in the social and economic development of countries. The theme for this year is Advancing Innovation for Global Aviation Development, but with over a year of travel bans, the question is, how does one remain innovative and adapt to changing times to lessen the impact of COVID-19 on air travel with its new variants? Here to answer this is Mr. Dumisani Sangweni, CEO at Air Traffic Navigation Services. Welcome, and let's get straight into it. Now, Dumisani, the Civil Aviation Navigation Organization is calling for greater industry unity in the face of the pandemic. Tell me about the impact COVID had on the sector and what cuts had to be made to reduce these costs.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, sir. The aviation industry and travel industry broadly have been severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The whole value chain from airlines to air navigation service providers such as ourselves, including airports and other linked entities and organizations. If we look at a global picture, airport revenues fell over 66%, amounting to US dollars 125 billion just in the last year globally. Airline revenue per passenger kilometers, as predicted by IATA, have dipped by over 65%. For us here in South Africa, similar figures. If we look at the domestic industry, air traffic movements through which we measure or are able to derive revenue also fell dramatically in the first part of the lockdown last year and have continued to do so throughout this year. So it has been a very difficult period and has necessitated that we come together as an aviation community, airlines, regulators, service providers, to try and confront some of the challenges that are ahead of us.
And how has this impacted ATN's revenue generation?
It has severely impacted our ability to generate revenue, both in what we term our regulated business here in South Africa, the business we are mandated to conduct, providing air traffic management solutions in our flight information region here in South Africa, as I mentioned. We have had a dramatic decrease in revenues, as mentioned, and this has impacted our ability to, on a tariff-driven basis, realize the revenues that we were used to. And if you look at then our cost base, which hasn't changed, it has put us in somewhat of a predicament, leading us to having to rely on reserves that the company had built, whilst we then engage in mechanisms to correct the situations. We've been on a cost containment and extraction drive for the last year and a half, and continue to look at and realize cost savings, but also continue to look at other areas, medium to long term, to reduce these costs. At the same time, we need to now look also at more innovative ways in what we call our non-regulated business, the business that we develop commercial relationships outside the country and inside training, offering consulting services, engineering technical solutions, and find ways to increase that. Also a business that was impacted because of the pandemic and the fact that we're also serving the aviation community.
Dumisani, the aviation industry has shown outstanding resilience, and as you have mentioned, taking into account the decline in the overall industry percentages. What have been the biggest lessons learned from everything that you have gone through?
I would say we've learned that you have to be agile. It is a good question that you asked me, because prior to the pandemic, we had crafted a strategy which spoke to agility, ability to innovate whilst also remaining safe. That is one of our biggest products as an entity in the airline or the aviation industry. And these, we had developed certain plans to implement and execute this strategy, and then the pandemic hit and forced us to become very responsive and talk to some of those areas of agility and innovation that we had espoused during the conceptualization of the strategy. It has forced us also to, as I said earlier, come together as an industry and work through partnership rather than in isolation and collaboratively. If you look at our value chain, the airlines are as the users, customers are a big part of our value chain, and if they are impacted and in problems, it affects us as we are seeing other partners through which we also service the industry, airports company, the Civil Aviation Authority are also very key to us being able to navigate this difficult terrain. So these are some of the lessons that we've come up with internally. The ability to also be flexible. The pandemic crippled us in some of our operations, very critical operations, OR Tambo, King Shaka, and Cape Town, because of the infection rate at our air traffic service units. And we had to respond in an innovative manner to ensure that we work within the protocols as set by government, the COVID-19 protocols, but also are able to make sure and guard the well-being of our controllers, whilst also providing a service.
Now, Dumisani, I'm glad you touched on the innovation. Innovative technology is an imperative element to the survival of the civil aviation industry. What are some of the increased technologies used? And subsequently, what are the benefits of using these technologies?
Well, the industry has shifted throughout the years from what we call terrestrial-based systems and moving to more satellite-based systems. And in our what we call our air traffic management roadmap, our future operating environment plans, which look 5 to 10 years forward, we have had to factor these technologies in terms of future acquisition. Some of them we are already working with. I'll give you an example. We are deploying what we call wide area multilateration. It's a satellite-based form of surveillance where we can develop a picture just like a terrestrial radar sitting at a site would be able to give an air traffic controller the picture of where the aircraft is. So these are some of the technologies that we are introducing. We are researching also through our research department to be able to deploy. The advantages are that they are cost effective in terms of maintenance, as opposed to a terrestrial system. Over time, they are cheaper than your traditional systems, and from a maintenance point of view, also less onerous than terrestrial systems. But it's a very delicate balance, because you cannot just phase out what we have. There has to be a mesh of the technology integration, and at a point at which we are comfortable with what we call safety cases that are able to demonstrate that the equipment can operate at the right performance levels, then we would possibly migrate. Similarly, in other areas, navigation, you already know of global navigation satellite systems that not only help guide aircraft, but also when we drive on the highways and try and find a destination, we're using those systems. So in the aviation space, we use that for navigation, apart from the terrestrial-based systems, which also exist, and beacons and other systems that are laid throughout all over the country in different terrains. Slowly, that is also shifting to a satellite navigation-based technology. But again, you have to be careful because these navigation systems help us define the routes up there that aircraft use to navigate from point to point. So you can't just eradicate your terrestrial platforms in favor of satellite-based systems. You have to mesh them and make sure that you are providing the services safely.
sticking on technologies, Dumisani, when we speak about artificial technologies, because you now introduce artificial intelligence, it is a topic sometimes is a concern, as it sets a threat for job losses, yet a very beneficial to us. And with us living in the fourth industrial revolution, we are becoming more acceptable to these technologies. How will the implementation of artificial intelligence bring improvement to the industry, and what will the potential benefits include?
No, thank you for that question. And it's not just artificial intelligence. There are other technologies, machine learning, alongside artificial intelligence and other leading technologies that we are exploring as part of research to deploy. And thank you for that question, because yes, it would seem that if we introduce a remote tower as opposed to a tower where you have manned personnel providing a service, there's now what we call remote towers, which are being used throughout in different areas of the globe, where you use technology to give you a view of a aerodrome, as an example. You would argue that yes, it would necessitate that you cut down on manpower in terms of controllers, but part of our strategy, as I alluded to earlier, was to look at reskilling some of our personnel to go into other areas. There may be an ability for a controller to become a specialist in developing some of these systems, in maintaining some of these systems, in playing other support roles as opposed to just controlling. So it's a delicate balance. Also, you are balancing between bringing in technology and also looking at working your manpower out in particular areas. But there are other opportunities that do arise. Simulators also are very key in terms of assisting us in training, as opposed to the traditional classroom-based learning, and have become popular not just in the air traffic navigation area, but throughout different value chain of aviation. Yet again, there you have to look at reskilling personnel that maybe have been traditional in the traditional instructor roles to maybe playing more of a maintenance or a development role. There's a whole lot of possibilities in terms of software development, hardware development that comes with simulator technology. So as ATNS, we're looking and exploring at how we can reskill our people as part of what we call the Future Fit program, as part of our corporate strategy to adapt to these technological changes.
Well, thank you to my guest, Dumisani Sangweni, CEO at Air Traffic Navigation Services. And to all our viewers, it's goodbye from me.